Story 1. Our cross to bear. I stared up at the mansion in front of me. Secluded, massive, and almost too beautiful to be real. It would be our honeymoon spot for the next 2 weeks. Nick came over, hands full of luggage, and planted a wet kiss on my cheek. "Ready?" he asked. More ready than ever. I smiled. "Wait," Nick suddenly said, jogging ahead of me. He ran inside with our bags and dropped them by the door. "Okay, now we're ready," he called out, jogging back. Then, without warning, he scooped me up in his arms, bridal style. "You're such a dork," I said, laughing. "You did just marry this dork, Mrs. Morris." I laughed again. That was true. I was Madison Morris now. It sounded strange, even to me. He set me down gently, and together we wandered through the brilliant catalog home. It really was magical. The kind of place you'd see in a magazine, too perfect to feel real. "Well, Mrs. Morris, what do you say we cook up some dinner?" Nick asked with a grin. I smiled and nodded. Cooking was our thing. Turn on some music, move around the kitchen, dance a little. It was our version of heaven. Nick pulled out a couple of aprons and tossed one to me. Soon, our favorite playlist was echoing through the big, echoing kitchen, and we got to work. I chopped vegetables while he carefully seared the steaks. He pulled them off the stove to rest, just as I was finishing my part of the meal. Then he came up behind me, slid his arms around my waist, and pulled me into a dance. As we danced, our eyes locked, and just as Nick leaned in to kiss me, bang, something smacked against the kitchen window, hard enough to make us both flinch. "What the hell?" Nick muttered, pulling away gently. We hurried over to the window, peering out into the dimming light. At first, nothing. Just the trees swaying and the wind brushing through the tall grass. Then we saw it. "A bear," Nick exclaimed, practically bouncing. He sounded like a kid on Christmas morning. I didn't share his excitement. I'd seen bears before. This one wasn't that impressive. It just stood there, oddly still, watching the house. "Let's get back to cooking," I said, giving him a gentle tug. He reluctantly stepped away from the window, his excitement fading. As we stepped back into the kitchen, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, frowning when I saw it was an unrecognized number. The message was simple. "Please, can we just talk?" My heart dropped. It wasn't just the text that shook me. It was the name that followed it in my head. Tom, my ex-husband. I handed the phone over to Nick immediately. He studied the text for a long moment, his brow furrowed. "Tom?" he asked, his voice taking on a serious edge. I don't know who else it could be," I said, my voice trembling, tears welling up in my eyes. "Forget him," Nick said, blocking the number and setting the phone on the counter. He stepped over and gently cupped my face, wiping away the tears that had started to form. "Let's eat." He pulled out a chair for me and began making my plate. A few minutes later, he set it down in front of me with a soft smile. Just as he pulled out his own chair and started to sit, everything went dark. "Great," I muttered, the sarcasm in my voice unmistakable. "It's okay, baby," he said calmly, already standing. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "They'll send someone over when they can," he told me after a short pause. Before I could even respond, he was already moving, grabbing a box full of candles from one of the kitchen drawers and lighting them one by one. The flickering glow cast warm light on his face. He looked golden in the candlelight, steady and sure. God, he was perfect. We ate and talked for a while. Nick always knew how to calm me down. His jokes, his stories, they wrapped around me like a blanket, chasing away the lingering unease. We laughed, and then he jumped up. "Wine time," he announced with a grin. I lit up. Not the cheap stuff you grab from Safeway. This was the real deal. Aged, imported. Probably older than both of us. I watched him pop the cork with a little ceremony and start pouring us each a glass. I could hardly sit still. Then my phone buzzed. We both froze. Nick looked at me, his expression suddenly tight. I hesitated, picked it up, and sure enough, another message from an unsaved number. "Don't ignore me, you bitch." Before I could react, Nick snatched the phone from my hand. His jaw clenched as he typed a reply. "Thanks for reminding us we need to renew the no-call order, you freak." Nick set the phone on silent and placed it face down on the table. We grabbed our wine glasses and made our way up the grand staircase, the flickering candlelight casting golden patterns on the walls as we climbed. Marble hallways stretched before us like something out of a dream. We walked them hand in hand, giddy and tipsy on wine and each other. When we found our room, it took my breath away. Rose petals lined the floor, forming a soft red trail that led straight to the bed, which was also scattered with petals, like a scene from a romance novel. I let out a laugh and ran for it, throwing myself onto the massive bed with a bounce. Nick followed, collapsing beside me with a smile. Finally, after a long day of travel and a few unwelcome interruptions at dinner, it was just us. Quiet, warm, safe. Nick grabbed the back of my head, fingers tangled in my hair. I melted into him. His lips pressed against mine, and the world around us faded. Everything, the travel, the messages, the power outage, vanished. It was just us. We leaned into each other more, hands and hearts racing. Crash! A loud, jarring sound from downstairs. Are we being deadass right now? I groaned, slamming my hand on the mattress. We both stood in unison and moved toward the hallway. Peering over the banister, we saw it. A mass. A furry mass. It looked like a bear. Frozen in place, we stared. No way a bear had broken into the house. Nick tiptoed to the hallway closet and quietly pulled out the shotgun. We crept slowly down the stairs, hearts pounding in sync. That's when something caught the candlelight. Just a glint. A shine along the creature's back. I narrowed my eyes, staring. Nick, wait, do you see that? See what? He whispered. The zipper, I said, voice flat and cold. Nick jolted, eyes wide, staring at the creature. What the? He breathed. His face drained of all color. Without hesitation, he raised the shotgun, aimed at the thing's head. Boom. The blast echoed through the house like thunder. The shot missed, ricocheting off the wall, but the noise sent the creature stumbling backward in panic. It crashed into the dining table, the one still scattered with candles. In an instant, the flames leapt up. Wax and fur caught fire at once. We stood frozen as the thing flailed, clawing desperately at the bear suit, trying to tear it off. But it wouldn't come off. It clung to him like a second skin, melting, fusing, sealing. And beneath the flames, we saw glimpses of something horribly human skin blistering, lips trying to scream through the seams. Nick stepped back, the gun shaking in his hands. I couldn't move. I could only watch as the creature writhed, burning alive, and dying slowly. The smell was unbearable. Not fur, flesh. We ran in terror, the bear man's screams echoing off the cold marble halls behind us. The police arrived within minutes, storming the house with drawn weapons. The fire had mostly burned out by then, but the smell still hung heavy. They began their investigation, cordoning off the scene while officers pulled us aside for questioning. Hours passed. Eventually, one officer approached me holding a small notepad. "Ma'am?" he said gently. "Do you know a Tom?" My heart sank. I nodded slowly. He exchanged a glance with another officer. We found a car parked just down the road, registered to a Tom Fields. Inside, we found dozens of letters, love notes, zip ties, pictures of you, dozens of them, some of them very recent. A chill slid down my spine. I could feel Nick stiffen beside me, his jaw tightening, fists clenching. The officer sighed. "From what we can tell, he came here to kidnap you." I couldn't speak, just nodded again, numb. Then came the final request. "Ma'am, we need you to come inside. See if there's anything among the remains you recognize." The body, if you could still call it that, was unrecognizable. Charred, shrunken. But there was one thing still intact. Wrapped snug around what remained of his pinky finger was my old wedding ring, the one I'd thrown into a river years ago. I stared at it, hollow. Guess karma really is a bitch. Story 2. The Wood's mother. The woods stood dark and mystic, cloaked in a silence that creaked with unease the longer it lingered. Each shadow stretched like a warning, each gust of wind a whispered omen. "Well?" Sophie said, breaking the quiet as she swung open the driver's side door and slung her backpack over her shoulder. "Shall we?" June hesitated, her eyes scanning the looming trees ahead. "I don't know about this." "You can stay if you want," Sophie replied, her voice laced with sarcasm as she flashed a wide, crooked smile. "Personally, I'd like to know more about the charming little forest where our parents were gruesomely murdered." June frowned, but followed in step, her unease trailing her like fog as they disappeared into the forest. The sisters walked in silence, their boots crunching over dead leaves and twigs that snapped like brittle bones. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the less it felt like any ordinary hike. The air was heavy, pressing against their chests like damp wool. The trees arched overhead in strange, unnatural angles, their twisted limbs clawing toward the gray sky. It wasn't long before they found the first one. A rabbit, its body torn open and arranged neatly in the center of the trail. Its insides were missing, removed with surgical precision, but its eyes remained, wide, glassy, staring directly at them. June gagged and turned away. Jesus, what the hell? Sophie crouched beside it, her expression unreadable. It's fresh. They moved on in tense silence, both glancing behind them more than ahead now. The deeper they walked, the stranger things became. Symbols began to appear on the trees. Crude carvings in spirals and slashes, some resembling ancient runes, others like staring eyes or fanged mouths. The bark around them was peeled back as if the trees had been flayed. At one point, June brushed her hand along a trunk and pulled back with a gasp. Her fingers were stained red. It looked like sap, but the smell was unmistakable. Blood. "What is this place?" she whispered. Sophie said nothing, but she didn't look surprised. They passed another animal. A fox this time, hanging from a low branch by its hind legs, its body swaying slightly, though no breeze stirred the forest. Its throat had been slit, a dark line carved with reverence. Something was stuffed in its mouth. A lock of blonde hair tied with a red ribbon. June stared in horror. Sophie, this wasn't an animal. This is a ritual. Sophie's eyes gleamed in the dim light. We're getting close. As the sisters wandered deeper, the dense forest began to open up, revealing a clearing where the trees stood in eerie formation, like silent sentinels. The air grew colder here, the atmosphere thick with an unnatural weight. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting long, distorted shadows across the forest floor. There was something about the clearing, an energy so dark and indescribable that it made June's skin crawl, as though the woods themselves were watching, waiting for something. "Let's set up camp here," Sophie said, her voice low but steady. She dropped her pack and began unrolling the tent, her movements methodical as if she had done this 100 times before. But June hesitated, her gaze shifting nervously from tree to tree. She could feel it. The air was too still. No birds, no insects. Just the soft, constant hum of the trees shifting against one another, their branches twisting in unnatural patterns. The clearing felt like a trap, and her heart beat faster with every passing second. The ground underfoot seemed wrong, soft, almost spongy in places, like something was buried just beneath the surface. She crouched to inspect the earth and found a patch of dirt that was unnervingly smooth. She brushed her fingers across it and felt a faint, cold pulse beneath her touch, as if the ground was alive, or had once been. "Sophie?" she called, voice trembling slightly. This place doesn't feel right." Sophie didn't seem to notice, or perhaps didn't care. She was too absorbed in her task, setting up the tent, her hands quick and confident. But June could see it now. The trees around the clearing weren't just old. They were scarred. Deep gouges marred their trunks, the bark torn away in jagged patterns like someone had tried to rip them apart. She could almost hear whispers on the wind. Too faint to make out, but there, watching her, watching them. "Come on, let's get the fire going," Sophie said, oblivious to June's growing panic. But June couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone here, that something had been waiting for them. She glanced around once more, her breath catching in her throat as she noticed something just beyond the trees. A dark shape, barely visible, shifting in the shadows. The crackling of the fire broke her focus, and she turned back to see Sophie crouched beside the flames, her face illuminated in the orange glow. "Everything's fine, June," Sophie said, her voice eerily calm. "Relax." But June couldn't. The feeling in her gut told her they weren't supposed to be here. Not now. Not ever. As the fire flickered and the shadows of the trees stretched long and twisted, June sat cross-legged beside Sophie, staring into the dancing flames. The warmth of the fire did little to chase away the chill creeping through her bones. The crackling embers were hypnotic, almost like a lullaby, but one she couldn't quite place. "I don't get it," June muttered, her voice soft, almost drowned by the wind. "We were so close, Sophie. After everything with Mom and Dad. I thought we'd always have each other, you know? Like, that's what kept us going. The two of us against the world." Sophie didn't respond, just continued to poke at the fire with a stick, her face lit by the orange glow. her expression unreadable. June blinked, her thoughts twisting as she tried to focus on Sophie. Something was nagging at her, but she couldn't place it. I mean, I've always depended on you. You were always the strong one, the one who kept me together. Her gaze lingered on Sophie's face as the flames cast dancing shadows. But something felt off. Sophie's features seemed too sharp, too ageless, her skin almost unnaturally smooth. How old is she, really? June's heart skipped a beat as she frowned, turning her thoughts over in her head, trying to fit the pieces together. There was something she was missing, some thread she hadn't pulled yet. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like something was slipping through her fingers. Sophie had always been there. But before the accident, before Mom and Dad, where was she? June felt her stomach twist. There was a gap, a blank space. The pieces of her memories seemed scattered, out of order. The fire crackled in front of her, but her mind was racing faster than her heartbeat. Where was Sophie before the accident? June blinked hard, confusion spreading through her chest. She looked at her sister. No, her companion. Sitting so casually, poking the fire. She opened her mouth, but the words felt like they were dragging her under the surface of a deep, murky water. She had to know. Sophie. June's voice broke the stillness of the forest like a scream in the dead of night. Where did you come from? Sophie's movements froze, her hands stilling above the fire. A heavy silence settled between them. June's pulse quickened as the world around her seemed to tighten, as if the trees were leaning in closer, as if they were listening. You've always been here, right? I mean, I remember us after Mom and Dad. After that night, June continued, her words growing more frantic as the realization dawned on her. A sharp, jarring truth slicing through the fog in her mind. But before that, Sophie, I can't remember. I can't remember you. Sophie's eyes flicked up, her expression unreadable. For the briefest moment, June saw something flicker beneath the surface of her sister's gaze. Something ancient, something not human. Then Sophie smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of her lips that made June's blood freeze in her veins. You're remembering now, Sophie murmured, her voice lilting, almost soothing. I've always been here, June. Right from the beginning, you just couldn't remember. June recoiled. What are you talking about? Sophie stood, her movements fluid, predatory. She didn't move like her sister anymore. There was no warmth in her now, just an icy chill that made June shiver, despite the heat of the fire. Our mother's body was never found. You remember that, right? Have you ever considered that she's still with us? The words hit like a punch to the gut. June stumbled back, confusion giving way to horror. No, I don't understand, she breathed. You're my sister. Sophie's smile stretched wider, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. She stepped toward June, her shadow swallowing the campfire's glow. You think you're the victim, June, she hissed, the words now laced with venom. But you're wrong. I've been waiting for you to remember, to wake up. June's head spun. Her breath came in ragged gasps. What are you talking about? You've been waiting? What do you mean? You're so much like her, Sophie continued, her voice now cold as ice. Just like your mother. Always so innocent, so sweet, so gullible. You never even questioned why we came out here, did you? June's legs wobbled beneath her, her entire body shaking as the truth clawed its way into her mind, deeper and deeper. The words Sophie spoke seemed to pierce her thoughts like nails in a coffin. You were the last piece, June, Sophie whispered, her smile widening grotesquely. The last offering to keep me young. To keep me alive. June's stomach churned violently. No, you're not her, she gasped. But Sophie wasn't Sophie anymore. Her eyes were dark, abyssal, infinite. And as June's mind reeled, the world around her seemed to shudder. The fire dimmed, flickered, and then snuffed out in a single breath, leaving them in complete, suffocating darkness. And then Sophie, her mother, her twisted, youthful mother, stepped closer, her voice now a low, guttural whisper that seemed to wrap around June's soul. Now, it's your turn, my dear. Just like I did with your father, I'll sacrifice you to keep my beauty, my youth, my deal. June's scream was swallowed by the blackened forest as the trees seemed to close in on her, their branches like grasping fingers. The wind howled, the ground trembled, and everything spiraled into madness. Story 3. The forest had always been a place of mystery, a place where the stories lingered like a fog that never quite lifted. Ella had heard those stories all her life. Tales her great-grandmother whispered to her mother in quiet voices, stories that drifted through her childhood like shadowed figures. They spoke of the Hollow, a place deep within the woods where the earth seemed to swallow sound, and where people went missing without a trace, their memories eroded like dust. The Hollow wasn't just a place, it was a force, ancient and unknowable. It claimed people, changing them, erasing them, until they were no more than forgotten echoes. Ella had never believed in it. Not really. She was a student of folklore, of anthropology, a skeptic. There was a part of her that always thought these were just stories to keep children away from dangerous places. The Hollow was nothing but a relic of superstition, a tale to frighten the naive. But the closer they got to the forest's edge, the more uneasy she felt. It wasn't just the haunting beauty of the trees or the stillness in the air. It was something else, something she couldn't put into words. I swear I've never seen the sky look so thick, Ella murmured as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the dense canopy. The woods felt like they were closing in on them. Mason, her most pragmatic friend, gave a half-hearted chuckle. You're starting to sound like the locals. They'll have you convinced any minute now that the trees talk. Ella smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The air was thick with something, an energy that felt alive in a way she couldn't explain. The deeper they trekked, the more she felt it like fingers brushing against her skin, or someone watching from just beyond her line of sight. But it wasn't just the eerie silence or the absence of animals. There was something unsettling in the way the trees bent and twisted, as if they had been purposefully placed, their trunks spiraling unnaturally, forming barriers and pathways that led deeper into the woods. June, one of their group members, pointed to a nearby tree. Look at this, she said, crouching down. It's like someone carved something into the bark. Ella moved closer, heart pounding, as she peered at the symbols etched into the tree's surface. They were unfamiliar and unsettling abstract, like runes or sigils, drawn hastily but with purpose. Her skin prickled as she traced one with her finger, and a low hum filled her ears as though the tree itself was vibrating. We should go, Ella said, her voice trembling despite herself. But they kept going. The forest seemed to draw them in, its darkness inviting them closer. They eventually reached a clearing, the trees parting to reveal an area bathed in twilight. The air here felt different, heavier, like the earth was thick with centuries of history. In the center of the clearing was a small, nearly circular patch of soil where the ground seemed to bend and pulse. The trees around it twisted in tight spirals, their roots curling above the earth like fingers gripping for something just out of sight. Mason set his backpack down with a thud. This is it, he said, his voice tinged with something that wasn't excitement. The Hollow. Let's set up camp. Ella stared at the clearing, her unease growing with every second. There was something wrong about it, a palpable sense of dread she couldn't shake. But she had come this far, and she couldn't let fear control her. She sat down and helped the others set up their tents, all the while glancing over her shoulder, the feeling of being watched never leaving her. As night fell, the temperature dropped and the wind began to stir in the trees. The fire they built crackled, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The flames seemed to flicker unnaturally, as though dancing to some ancient rhythm. I thought this place was supposed to be dangerous, Lily said, half joking as she pulled her jacket tighter around her. It's just a myth, Mason replied, though his voice had a certain edge to it, one Ella had never heard before. People get lost in the woods all the time. It doesn't mean some spirit is eating them. But as the wind howled around them, a low, whispering murmur seemed to creep through the trees, so faint at first that Ella thought she imagined it. Then it grew louder. A chorus of voices, soft, almost unintelligible, but unmistakable. It sounded like her name. Ella. She froze, her blood running cold. I heard that, she whispered, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Mason frowned. What are you talking about? No one's out there. But then Ella heard it again, this time clearer. Ella! Her head snapped toward the trees, but there was nothing. The others were still laughing, oblivious. their voices filling the silence with a false sense of normalcy. But for Ella, the air had thickened. The whispers were growing louder, like they were inside her head, echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. She stood abruptly. I need some air. Before anyone could stop her, she walked away from the fire, her heart pounding in her chest. The forest seemed to stretch and warp around her, the trees bending closer. She stumbled into the clearing at the center of the hollow, where the ground pulsed beneath her feet. And then she saw it. In the distance, just beyond the firelight, was a figure. A woman, standing in the shadows of the trees. Her face was hidden, but Ella could see the outline of her silhouette, tall, familiar. But something was wrong. The woman was too still, too quiet. "Who are you?" Ella called, her voice shaky. "What do you want?" The woman didn't respond, but Ella's heart twisted. She knew this figure. She had seen this face before. Or rather, she had seen it in her memories. Her great-grandmother. Her mother. The faces were blurry, indistinct, but they were there etched into her mind like a puzzle piece she couldn't quite fit. Suddenly, the whispering returned, this time louder, more urgent. "Ella, come back." Ella staggered backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her thoughts were spinning. Where was I? What am I seeing? Mason and Lily had followed her, but when they saw the figure, they froze, their faces draining of color. "Who is that?" Lily whispered. "I don't know," Ella said, her voice barely a whisper. She tried to take a step forward, but something inside her stopped her. A deep, gut-wrenching feeling that if she took another step, she would never return. The woman's voice was soft now, almost a sigh. "You've always been mine, Ella. You've always belonged here." And then, like a snap, Ella's world fragmented. Memories flooded her. Ones she didn't recognize, and yet they felt so real. Her great-grandmother whispering the same stories, telling her never to venture here. Her mother, pale and haunted, warning her to stay away from the hollow. But they had been here before, hadn't they? They had always been here. The woman stepped forward, her face coming into view, and Ella saw it. Her own face, twisted in age, worn by time. Her mother's face, her great-grandmother's face. All of them the same. "It's time, Ella," the woman whispered. "You are the next." The truth crashed down on Ella like a wave, so hard, so painful that she couldn't breathe. She had never been Ella. Not the Ella she thought she was. She was a part of the hollow. A vessel. A replacement. And now the cycle was about to continue. The last thing she heard was her own voice, calling her name.